Welcome to the NAP Exam Prep Podcast, a focused 6-week series designed to support you preparing for the National Association of Parliamentarian exam. I am Dr. Lisa Burton, and each week we'll break down key governance concepts, procedures, and foundational knowledge you need to approach the exam with clarity and confidence. This podcast is educational, intentional, and time-bound, created to help you study smarter, understand the why behind the rules, and strengthen your overall governance knowledge. Whether you're testing for the first time or refreshing your understanding, you're in the right place. So let's get started. This is episode 5. We are covering chapters 9 and 10 of Robert's Rules of Order in brief, edition 3. Here are your reminders. Please make sure if you see the blue gavel, it is important for the exam. There will be a quiz in the description box to help for your review. And if you've been following along, I suggest that you send in your application to parliamentarians.org to take your exam. So here's my disclaimer. And we're going in first, chapter 9, nominations and elections. So what are nominations? There's a formal proposal to the voting body to fulfill an office or position. Nominations is a suggestion for a particular person to be elected, and this is the process to narrow the voting down to a willing and qualified candidates. Now, most common nomination procedures are either from the floor or directly from the nominating committee. So when nominations come from the floor, the details or the rules from the organization should dictate how this goes. So when nominations can be made from the floor, the officer should state, nominations are now in order for the office of president. Then they would move on to another one. Nominations are now in order for the office of vice president. The chair must call for further nominations at the session that the election is held, even if nominations were called at an earlier session. And your bylaws would dictate how the nominations are called. They are called for after the nominating committee report is given. Any member may call out a name without being recognized by the chair. And a member may not nominate more persons than there are places to fill. When more than one person is to be elected to the office or position, no member may nominate more than one person for the office or position until every member wishing to nominate for that office has had an opportunity to do so. And a second is not always necessary. So, for example, the chair calls for nominations for the office of president. Someone stands and says, I nominate Susie Q. That person who just nominated Susie Q has to wait to maybe there's a pause and nobody else stood up to nominate a different person. So make sure you're following the order and the flow for nominations. Now, this nominating committee, how is it formed? And this is based on Robert's Rules of Order. But you can also make sure you have this information in your bylaws or SOPs. So the bylaws should provide both the following statement. The president shall appoint all committees except the nominating committee, and the president shall be ex officio of all committees except nominating committee. Neither should be omitted. This is a very important statement. This keeps the integrity of your elections after nominations. Members should be either elected by the assembly or the executive board whenever possible, or depending on what your bylaws say, they can volunteer. Committee usually nominates one candidate for each office, but unless the bylaws prohibit it, the committee may nominate more than one. Make sure that the committee contacts each nominee and secure their consent to serve. And members of the committee, nominating committee, can become nominees for office. So this nominating committee, if you listen to its name, can nominate people, or depending on how your committee is structured, they can ask for nominations beforehand, but it must be written in the bylaws. So what is their responsibility? They can nominate one candidate for each office, and remember, this is based on Robert's Rules of Order, and should secure the consent before doing so. The chair should give the report at the meeting in which the election is held, or a previous meeting if the report has been distributed or published. When the chair calls for nominations from the floor, the name that was submitted by the nominating committee is repeated first. The presiding officer will call for nominations from the floor, not the chair of the committee. The committee is automatically discharged when the report is formally presented to the assembly. So here's a suggested script to handle nominations. So the presiding officer would state, the next item of business is the report of the nominating committee presented by Chair Jones. And then the committee chair would give the report. The nominating committee chair would then state, Mr. President or Chair, Madam Chair, the nominating committee submits the following nominations for president. Mr. A, it might be a longer list. For vice president, Mr. B, it might be a longer list, so on and so forth, for each office to be filled, naming the nominees in the order in which the offices are listed in the bylaws. And if you notice, there is a blue gavel, so make sure you pay attention to this script. So for nominations from the floor, here is a sample script. The presiding officer will say, for president, Mr. A is nominated by the nominating committee. Are there any further nominations for president? The presiding officer should pause, and someone may nominate Mr. N. The presiding officer will then say, Mr. N is nominated. Are there any further nominations? Make sure you pause. If not, or the presiding officer can say without objection, nominations are closed. And it's closed for that particular office. Now, closing nominations, let me go back very quickly. For this process from the floor, you continue with each office until you are finished with each office that is up for election. And now, when you finish with each office up for election, you're ready to close nominations. So when it appears that no one else is standing up to make further nominations, the chair declares nominations closed without waiting for a motion to close. After they've been closed, a majority vote is required to reopen nominations. Seconds are not required for nominations. Once a member is nominated, it is not required to attain a second. Please know that the chair does not need to call for more nominations 3 times before closing them. So some people do that as a courtesy. They'll say, is there any more nominations for the office of president? They'll pause. They'll say it again. Is there any more nominations for the office of president? That's not necessary. Just follow through the script. If somebody wants to nominate, they'll stand. So now, elections. Now, election rules should be included in the bylaws of the organization, but you can do them separately. Elections are typically done by secret ballot. If the bylaws specify that the election is conducted by ballot, it must be done that way. Now, some organizations provide for election by acclamation when there's only one nominee for office, but that has to be provided in your bylaws. If not, you still have to go through the ballot. Voters may write in the names of candidates who may have not been nominated if they are eligible, and if the bylaws do not prohibit this. So that's why sometimes for elections, people have special rules that say, these elections are done by secret ballot, person must have been nominated, and no write-in candidates. Now, election is by majority vote. If there's no majority, Voting must take place until the majority is obtained. Candidates are not removed from the ballot unless they choose to do voluntarily. So this information on this slide is very important on how you should handle your elections. Now, when the vote is final, the election is final once the chair announces the result. And we have already gone over information about a teller's report and voting. So make sure you review how to do a teller's report. If the candidate declines to serve, they are not elected. If the newly elected officer is not present at the election and did not previously consent to serve, it becomes final once they are notified, and if they don't, immediately decline. If the elected officer declines, the election continues until someone has been achieved a majority vote and is willing to accept. The newly elected officer takes office immediately upon the announcement unless the bylaws provide for a different beginning term of office. Now, most people make the assumption, depending on your organization, oh, it's a new year, so that person automatically then will take office. But if it's not written in your bylaws, they automatically take office once elected. Now, while many organizations have ceremonies where newly elected officers are installed, these are not necessary for the officer to claim office. So that is the end of chapter 9, talking about nominations and elections. And just a reminder, this is an overview, or we try to cover most of the chapter, but please make sure you are reading the chapter and also going through the study guide that is also posted in the description box. So we are here now at chapter 10. What are the basic types of rules? Now, ranking of rules for governing an assembly. Make sure you know the correct order. This order is very important because this order also determines on how you govern your organization. Now, depending on your organization, everyone has laws, which are rules of procedure included in applicable law. So the law of wherever state you are located in, the law that your organization is incorporated in also is the highest rank. Next would be the corporate charter, and that's only for incorporated organizations. Next are the bylaws and the Constitution, were basic rules created by the organization to personalize the rules in parliamentary authority. 4 are rules of order. These are written rules about procedure, and that can include special rules of order created for the organization, and then parliamentary authority, general book of rules. Then number 5, you have standing rules, which are details about administrative procedure, and then custom. Remember, the higher ranking rules always have precedence over the lower ranking ones. And one thing about these rules, when you write them down, they are better standing than trying to remember. So write down all your rules from 1 to 6 should be written down. So let's look at each rule closely. So your federal, state, or local laws and corporate charters supersede any conflicting provision in the organization rules. So no matter what happens, the law is the law. So if you decide to do certain things that go against the law, like hazing, or things like you go against the nonprofit law because of your organization, that law is over everything. So any federal, state, or local procedural law governs your procedures, and this is most likely to be a consideration when the organization is incorporated. So whatever state your organization was incorporated in, those laws apply basically to your national level. A corporate charter rules and what they contain will vary from state to state. And a parliamentarian may need to know what is required by the charter if the organization is incorporated. So make sure, depending on where your organization was incorporated, you know the laws of that area that apply to your organization on a global level. Now, bylaws or constitution contain the highest level of rules for the organization. Now, your constitution is first, and some organizations have constitutions in addition to bylaws, and it should include things that the organization wishes to make particularly difficult to change. So your constitution, basically, it should take a lot of votes or a lot to determine how you're going to change it. Your bylaws include the purpose of the organization. So things like qualification for membership, how the organization will be governed, and provide for their own amendment. So your bylaws are a little bit easier to change than your constitution, but it's still going to take some time because you still got to submit amendments for your bylaws. So if you have any questions, please make sure you put them in the chat. You can send me an email. I'll be glad to answer them. Now, after law, you got your constitution and bylaws. Let's look at rules of order. And if you notice, this rules of order does include Robert's Rules of Order. So if you look at it, your bylaws, your constitution, and especially if you're an organization, if you have different levels of bylaws, they supersede Robert's Rules of Order. So most people adopt parliamentary authority, and it has to be named in your bylaws, and most people use Robert's Rules of Order. And the rules included in this authority apply when they do not conflict with your bylaws, or when the bylaws are silent on that subject. So if it's in your bylaws rule. So running to Robert's Rules of Order because you don't like what your bylaws say, you can't do that. You should actually look to your bylaws to rule your organization. If there's no authority named in the bylaws, or if another authority is consulted, these rules may be persuasive but are not binding. And you can create special rules of order to supersede those in the parliamentary authority. So if you write special rules of order, they're even above Robert's Rules of Order. So things that you write down are above Robert's Rules of Order. We use Robert's Rules of Order to help us govern ourselves, but you yourself should know how your organization works so you can follow your governance. Standing rules are just administrative details that are less important because they do not relate to the conduct of business. Unlike bylaws and special rules, adoption of standing rules only require a majority vote. An example of standing rules may be the location of the monthly meeting. Notice that in some meetings we say standing rules, but we just mean rules of order. And last but not least, the role of custom. A repeated habit that is followed as if it is a written rule. These customs are followed as long as they do not conflict with actual rules. Members by majority vote can decide to change the custom. If the custom is or becomes in conflict with a written rule, a member can make a point of order to this effect, and the written rule must be followed. The membership wishes to follow custom, they may adopt a special rule of order, a standing rule, or a bylaw provision. So custom is great, but you got to remember not everybody remembers custom. So it's usually better to write down your customs so that it can be followed by everybody, no matter what year it is. If it's 1988 and you did a custom, and then all of a sudden it's 2025, and you're like, we used to do that, I haven't heard about it. It's better to have it written down so it can be followed. Tradition is great. So for next steps for next week, review parliamentary terms and procedures covered today. Practice recognizing when procedures are used correctly. Focus on understanding purpose, not memorization. Remember that parliamentary procedure supports order and fairness. The exam tests understanding, not speed. Progress matters more than perfection. Make sure you trust the process. And yes, you're like, wait, where are the questions? We are wrapping up towards the end. There will be a quiz in the description box. But before you go, make sure you reviewed all the concepts and connect it to real chapter operations, not just your exam. Remember, this is a 6-week limited series, so be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for spending this time investing in your preparation and your leadership growth. Until next time, study with purpose and stay encouraged, and I will see you next week.